Hello everyone and welcome to this second entry in the PvM series. This time we'll be talking about the basics of combat and we'll be going through the very basic of things. So, how does the combat work in Runescape? Well, the combat in Runescape works very simple. You click on an enemy and you're gonna start attacking that enemy. You're gonna be using auto attacks at first. So these are basic attacks. So if you're using a sword, you will be cleaving at the enemy. If you're using a bow, you will be firing arrows or firing spells if you're using a staff. And you will be attacking this enemy repeatedly until any one of you both die. So one thing that's important to note is that every single weapon in the game has an attack speed. And as you can see in these three different clips, the weapons attack at different rates or different speeds. So the first two-handed sword hits very slow, and the others will start hitting rapidly, and it depends on the weapon. Most of the time, the fastest weapons has the lower damage ratio, so it doesn't really matter that much about attack speed. Besides, auto attacks won't be used for much. They are used and they're very important in some advanced techniques we'll be looking at in the next videos, in the next couple of sections. But most of the time you won't be using auto attacks. Most of the time what you will be using will be abilities. And abilities are special effects, special attacks, to call it some way, that you can use with an enemy to inflict damage and to inflict certain conditions, certain types of effects. We'll be looking at special types of abilities in the next video, so keep your eyes peeled on that. And also important, as you can see up on the screen, there's a yellow bar that starts filling up next to your HP, and it also appears overhead above your character's head, and that is your adrenaline. Every time you use a basic ability or an auto attack, you will gain adrenaline in a fixed amount. That fixed amount can be manipulated by certain stuff. So right now, as you see on the video, I'm gaining around 9% every time I use an ability, and those are basic abilities. So basic abilities, most of them are unlocked by leveling up your strength, your attack, your range, your magic, your combat skills, but some of them can be unlocked as drops or as rewards from different activities, and we'll get to them little by little. So you usually start doing basic abilities and you're hitting the enemy with these abilities over and over and over again. After you hit them for a while, you're gonna have at least 50% adrenaline, and that's when you can use a threshold ability. Threshold abilities are the main damaging abilities of the game. You use basic abilities mostly to get to 50% adrenaline so that you can start using threshold abilities. And threshold abilities usually deal high amounts of damage and they have certain effects. And what's important about them is that every time you use a threshold ability, your adrenaline will drain by 15%. So as you can see, we're at 55 right now, we're at 40 on the video, and we can't use them, they are grayed out. So you need to build up, you need to use basics to go back to 50, and then you can use another threshold ability. Finally, but not last, we have ultimate abilities. And ultimate abilities are some of the best abilities in the game, and they are abilities that require 100% adrenaline, and they use 100% of your adrenaline. So whenever you use an ultimate ability, you're gonna see your adrenaline get completely depleted. There are ways to prevent that, ways to handle, to keep certain amounts of adrenaline, but we'll see that later. So they're between the most strong abilities in the game. However, the time required to get to 100% to use just one ability, it's sometimes not that good, and that's why thresholds are probably the most important type of ability in the game. So those are the four kinds of attacks, the four kinds of abilities we can use, and then we mix them together in what we call an ability rotation. So an ability rotation is a set of moves, a set of abilities we use in a row during certain situations that will allow us to deal a lot of damage during a small period of time. And it's usually important to have a nice ability rotation or to have a good way to deal damage, because there are so many abilities in the game, so many thresholds, so many basics, so many ultimates. So to know which ones to use in which moment, so that you can just go there and wreak some havoc and destroy the enemy as fast as possible, and most importantly, so that you can beat that boss, or you can beat that enemy, get the loot, get experience, and don't die trying to get. So this is the part for abilities. Also, you might have seen, you might have noticed in the game that there are different types of combat. There are three types of combat basically in Runescape, and those are melee, ranged, and magic. Each one signified by their own skills. Melee is signified by the skills attack and strength. Ranged is signified by range, and magic is signified by magic. And each one of them beats the other. It's like a rock, paper, scissors kind of thing. Melee beats ranged, range beats magic, and magic beats melee. And they also imply that each enemy in the game, even players, have a specific weakness. So almost every single thing in the game has a weakness. Most bosses do not have a specific weakness, however, they tend to have weakness classes, and we're going to talk about it in a bit. So, whenever you see one of the icons we have here on screen, you are seeing the weakness of the enemy, and they can be stabbing weapons, slashing weapons, bashing weapons for melee, arrows, bolts, or thrown weapons for range, or any of the four elements that you can use magic on. And what this means is that they are affecting something called affinity in the game. And affinity is one of the most complex things in the game and one of the hidden secrets. However, it's really easy to understand. The affinity is a value that determines the hit chance you have against something. So if you're hitting something with a sword and he has zero affinity with melee, you won't hit him at all. He will have 0% chance of being hit with that style. That means the higher the number, the higher your hit chance, the higher your damage will be. So most monsters have these affinity charts, and they have 4 different affinities per monster. And that means they have a specific weakness, they have a style they're weaker to, and a style they're stronger here. So for example, right now, the chart we have on the screen will mean that you have a 90%, you have an affinity of 90. It doesn't translate to percent, but an affinity of 100 would mean the monster is absolutely weak and nothing you do will fail with that style. So you have around a 90% chance of hitting it with earth type spells. That means he's weak to magic. So any magic attack from any element will have a 65 affinity. That's the highest one, so it's the best one to use. And you have 55 for melee and 45 for range. As we were talking before, we have this combat triangle here, so magic beats melee. That means he's using melee, and since he's a melee class monster, thus making him weak to magic, he will be resistant to range. So most of the time, if something is weak to magic, you want to hit him with magic or melee, and so on and so forth. So I hope this wasn't too confusing. Affinity will be very important, especially for high tier bosses. And when we talk about equipment and special attacks, we're going to talk about some other ways we can influence affinity in different monsters, like increasing affinity by a certain amount, thus allowing you to hit easier. But this is it for today. I hope it was clear. And for the next time, we'll be talking about abilities. We'll be talking about abilities itself. So hope this guide is going well. Hope this guide is liking. Hope this guide is doing good for you guys. Hoping you understand a bit more about this game. And as always, see you guys next time.